I'm really pleased to welcome back my next guest, Bill Binney. Hello, Bill.
Hello, Jason. Good to be back
Bill,
with you.
it's wonderful to have you back. You're an internet favorite, Bill, champion to people who are friends of justice. You've stood up to the NSA. You're a whistleblower. You've verified so many of the things that Edward Snowden revealed about mass surveillance on U.S. citizens, including President Trump. And you've got some new revelations for us today. Is that right?
Yes, well, the latest ones are on the material that was looked at by Forensicator and others who are working with us, the VIPs, collaborating with us, looking at the DNC data this time, the DNC data that WikiLeaks posted.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when we look at that, when he looked at that, he found that common time, that is the timestamps, the last modified times on all the, at least the first 500 files they looked at, were all ending in even numbers. Timestamps on modifications, the last modified times have an equal chance of being even or odd. So the chance of that being a random event is like one chance in 2 to the 500th power. That's mathematically the possibilities, which is like one followed by 150 zeros. For example, you want to do base 10.
Pretty unlikely.
Yeah, so there's one chance in, a trillion times 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 a trillion. You have to times a trillion almost 16 times at least to get that number. So that gives you the idea of the extremely remote chance. It's almost impossible anyway. So what that says is there was a program that went through to do that. Now the programs that do that are things like the FAT format, file allocation table format. That's a file program that goes through to read data to a thumb drive or in a CD-ROM. So what it's saying and implying is that the data was read to a physical storage device, a CD-ROM or a thumb drive, for example, and then transported physically before WikiLeaks posted it. And it's not. This is true of the DNC data, but not of the other data from, for example, Podesta. Those emails didn't show the FAT formats.
Right. So I think, Bill, for a lot of people at home, it's very confusing to just keep this story straight. We've got Guccifer 2.0, we've got Seth Rich, we've got John Podesta emails, we've got DNC information, DCCC information. Imran Awan was accused of hacking things. There's the hack versus the leak. What can the average person at home who's not a computer expert, how can they unravel all this in their mind and understand what the different parts of it are?
Well, it's like you can just simply say from this, at some point in time, the data was physically transferred before it got to WikiLeaks. And if you looked at just the open source testimony of people, the ones who have some firsthand knowledge of the events, like, for example, British Ambassador Craig Murray, met someone on the American University campus a few years ago who had basically said he was involved in a transfer of data to WikiLeaks.
Right.
Well, that says, just from that, that's saying that there was an insider involved in this, and there was a physical transport. Well, that's consistent with the forensics of the data that WikiLeaks put out there for the DNC. This is the late May 2016 release, that came from WikiLeaks.
And as I recall, Craig Murray, we met him in London, right outside the embassy. Maybe should we listen to that? Have you had a chance to hear that conversation?
No, I haven't, but please do.
Yes, let's play that for everyone. This will be quite interesting. Craig Murray, did he receive information from Seth Rich? And then George is going to feed me questions for Craig Murray, and I'll whisper them to you. So try to politely squeeze in there and speak to him. He's right there, standing right there. Mr. Murray, can I introduce you to Trish Negron?
Hello, it's very nice to meet you. We're from the U.S. and we were wondering, we've been following Seth Rich story
Yes,
for
I know.
quite some time now.
I've seen you on YouTube.
Have you really?
Well,
Crowdsource the truth. You're watching. It's really an honor to meet you, sir.
George Webb, is that?
Yes. George is in the United States right now working on as the part of the story that led us down a potential dirty bomb that may have been aboard one of the cargo ships that came into port in Charleston the other night. So it seems to have set off some sort of firestorm. In the meantime, we came here to see, we wanted to find Eric Braverman, who was the CEO of the Clinton Foundation and had gone missing.
Who's vanished?
Yes, and so George Webb's series, of course. And when we heard Julian was supposed to come out, we were thrilled, so we ran over here. And we were wondering if you would be able to talk to us about the thumb drive or any of the details that you've shared before, and maybe you could just review what you have now, and if Seth may have been the person that handed it to you.
No, I don't really want to say much more. I've been carefully avoiding saying much more for many months. I would say there wasn't a thumb drive.
Okay.
Well, it may have been a thumb drive, but I didn't have it. What I was doing was administrative, let me put it that way, as opposed to picking up emails on a dead letter drop. I was doing something. Not even whistleblowers have administration.
Right. Well,
and bureaucracy. So I was doing something administrative. And the other thing I would also say is that I'd never in my life met Seth Rich, and he of course had sadly been murdered some months before the occasion on which I was there meeting with somebody. So, and I really don't want to say a great deal more than that.
have you ever met Eric Braverman?
No, I haven't. And in fact, until I heard he'd vanished, I'd never heard of him. So,
Are you familiar with a set of files that were released by Guccifer2 about 8-9 months ago that were retweeted by WikiLeaks? The link was, and it contained NGP van data as well as which is a voter data for the United States that the Democratic Party gathers and utilizes in elections, and then it also had some Clinton Foundation documentation in them, and we actually also resubmitted them to WikiLeaks a few weeks ago after they were provided to us on a thumb drive, because that link on the Guccifer2 website is gone now. And so I wondered if you have any knowledge of that or could comment on those documents or the files?
I mean, I know of it, but I probably don't know a lot more about it than you do.
Okay. Well, could you, since we submitted them to WikiLeaks, and we're wondering...
Pretty much the bulk of what he had to say there. People can go back and listen to that interview, but he never had a thumb drive. But we should also keep in mind that this is an individual reporting on what he knows. There's lots of possible things going on that he may not be privy to. What do you think about that interview, Bill?
Well, I mean, I think he's telling what he can and what he knows about. That's all.
Yeah.
But there's other information, of course. You're familiar with the illicit recording of Cy Hirsch.
Yeah.
And some of the knowledge he had. My sources are saying from the people I know, they have at least two other avenues of information coming to them that verify what Seth said about the FBI having the data on Seth Rich's computer where he contacted WikiLeaks and transferred some data and wanted money for the rest of the data. So that's I don't think that's publicly known yet. So. But, I mean, the whole point is it's still all the pointers of information, forensics and otherwise, are not pointing at the Russians. They're pointing at somebody internally in the system here in the United States.
Right. Now, so Bill, I think this is very interesting what you brought up about the FAT file allocation table format and how, so anytime anything is written on a disk or a storage unit that's using the file allocation table, it's always going to be even numbered time?
The program, the software rounds to the nearest even number.
Huh. What about the possibility that someone would hack something, download it, and then put it on a thumb drive?
Well, I mean, anything's possible, but it does say that it's on a thumb drive for a period of time. Where that occurs, we don't know, and we can't prove, but it certainly is up to now Mueller to prove that it didn't happen at the DNC or actually prove where it did happen. Because it's evidence that any defense attorney who is worth his salt would bring up and say, look, this is evidence that it was read to a thumb drive, and it was an inside job.
Right.
I mean, that's pretty clear. That's where the probabilities are with that kind of information. So the question is, where did it happen? If Mueller's going to claim that that's what was passed to the Russians and the Russians passed it to WikiLeaks, they can't show that either. You know? But there's no proof on their part at all. I mean, I've seen absolutely no evidence coming out that anybody could sink their teeth in as saying, here's some ground truth for you. You're not getting that from the government in the U.S. or anywhere else.
Yeah, well, now this is crazy talk. You want evidence, Bill. Well,
it's kind of important to have in a court of law because you won't get away with this kind of shenanigans in a court of law.
They seem to be getting away with it, though. And I know this wasn't a court of law, but just the other day in the congressional hearing where Michael Cohen was showing checks written from Donald Trump's personal account to him, which don't seem like much proof of anything other than he was Trump's lawyer getting paid.
Yeah.
Debbie Wasserman Schultz, right, it's a retainer fee. Debbie Wasserman Schultz posed a question to Michael Cohen in which she sort of slipped in the foregone conclusion that Russia hacked, Russia interfered with our election. There's been so much fake news about this. For most people, it is a foregone conclusion.
Well, that's only because they've been brainwashed by repetition from many different directions.
Right.
I mean, that's fundamentally goes back to as I pointed out in any number of interviews, it goes back to the ancient Greece school of sophism. One of the ways to win your argument is to keep saying it over and over again until everybody believes it.
Wow. Yeah, we've heard about that. It's also very popular Nazi propaganda technique. Yep. Just keep telling a lie, big lie, over and over, and eventually people.
Well, that's what Adolf Hitler said. If you're going to tell a lie, make it a big one. Tell it often until it's believed.
Yeah. So it seems like they're following that adage. Bill, in the past, you've told me that your personal observation for more than 30 years in the NSA and serving the U.S. government for the bulk of your life was that one of the biggest problems that our government agencies have are these outside contractors who kind of get in there and have their hands all over the data. We've heard many times that this CrowdStrike company, which was started by an FBI alum, Sean Henry, and a Russian expatriate who is a member of the Atlantic Society, Dmitry Alparovich, they're the only ones to conduct any kind of, forensic investigation of this DNC server. How does that play into your latest evidence?
Well, it's not credible. I mean, the point is that if they're going to say something like that, they need to expose everything. And they should have done it from the beginning up until now. They've had any opportunity to change or modify any of it. See, that's the problem with the lack of the chain of custody of evidence. You can't take that into a court of law now as anything that's any reliable set of data because they didn't have chain of custody of it. The FBI didn't, and so therefore they can say, well, it's been modified or something. How can you prove it hasn't been modified? I mean, you can't trust it. So that's the real problem. I keep going into a court of law because that's where all this garbage about emotion, the mental impairment of the emotions of people here is by emotion is what's causing people really trouble in seeing what the truth is.
Right, and we see a lot of that even during the hearing. We had Rashida Tlaib, starting an argument, very inappropriate for a congressional setting with Mark Meadows, and we've got these freshman Congress people who think that they're in charge, and if you don't like it, too bad kind of a thing. So, Bill, the initial part of your research involved the speed of the transfer. Can you talk about that a little bit to refresh people's memories as to what that helped you determine?
Sure. I was looking at this data with Duncan Campbell in the UK. I was visiting there, and we went into looking at this data. And what we were looking at were file names, the transfer amount of data transferred in the file, and the timestamp at the end of the file. So when you do that, and you have a series of those email or files one after the other, all you have to do is take the difference between the time, and you can calculate the rate of transfer of the data in between. So that's the way we did it. So we calculated the rates of transfer of all the data, every file individually. And when we looked at that again, the highest rate we got was 49.1 megabytes per second. Now that meant that that's the rate that had to go across at a minimum, because that didn't include any of the housekeeping that's added on top of it. So if it was being transferred across the net, it should have just continued right across the net to where it was going. In Europe, they're alleged it was going to Russia. Okay. Well, when we said the 49.1 megabytes per second isn't compatible with any transfer rates that we've ever achieved across the net anywhere, so we said this couldn't be achieved through that to Russia. And even some of the members of our BIPS group said, "Oh, yes, it can." And so we said, "Okay, we're going to try this." So I got some hacker friends in Europe, and a friend over here in the U.S. has set up a database and said, "Okay, how about you guys over there in Europe pull this across, see how fast you can get it." So we tried it in several places from Albania and Serbia, Belgrade, and several places in Netherlands, and also between data centers in New Jersey and London. And the fastest possible rate we got was 12.0 megabytes per second, which was less than 1/4 just to transfer the data, the rate necessary to transfer the data at the rates we could calculate from the data presented for Guccifer 2. So that meant that for us, it just couldn't go. It was in between data centers, So that made it pretty clear that we couldn't do that. And so we said, "Hey, this doesn't work." So and some of our people still insisted it did. So we said, "Okay, we'll help you do it. You just figure out where or how we can do this, and then we'll try it."
Right.
And so far, we've not heard anything from any of them.
Yeah, because there were people, Bill, who contacted me after our last interview. Right now, we're live streaming here, and I've got your Skype call coming in. I pay for 300 megabits per second download speed. I'm getting 176, and it's megabits, and it's important that people understand that there's 8 bits per byte, so we would need to divide this number by 8 to determine the number of megabytes
about
per
21
second.
megabytes per second,
Yeah. So why am I able to download 21 megabytes here, but only 12 from the data center examples that you had?
Well, I can't really tell you, because it's according to the lines you have, how far that line goes. Does it go all the way across the Atlantic?
Right.
How far does that line go?
No idea.
You have a high-speed line, and if you have it dedicated to you, you can do that.
Right.
But when you go across the network, you're not going through dedicated lines. You're shared lines with everybody.
Right.
And so, in fact, what we were doing, I used it to calculate the limitation that the service providers put on top of the ability to transfer data across the net. For example, and this was from the U.S. to Europe. All the testing we did, for a 100 megabit line, we got 0.8 megabytes. For a 200 megabit line, we got 1.6 megabytes. And for a roughly 1.5 gigabit line, we got 12 megabits. Well, that works out for every 100 megabits you have, you're allowed 0.8 megabytes. That translates to 10 standard telephone lines. So there's that limitation there. That is, you see, if I came on the line, I said I wanted to send 1 terabit of data, or terabyte, say.
Right.
They would not go all at once, and you could not occupy the line, because you'd block everybody else out. Depending on the line size, you could keep them out for quite some time. So that's the reason they have that limitation.
And this was really your specialty when you developed Thin Thread for the NSA. It was all about the amount of data traveling over, network switches and all that kind of thing. And this is a particularly difficult subject for most people to grasp. I mean, someone being a computer expert, for instance, it's a broad field. I'm somewhat of an applications expert when it comes to digital media, so I've got an area of knowledge in the world of computers that perhaps you know nothing about, but of course your expertise is vast in an area that I know nothing about. So it's easy, I think, for other people to confuse the general public when we get into topics like this, because people just don't know who to believe. And what you're telling us right now, someone sent me this article sort of challenging you, this thing from Tech Dirt, but it doesn't seem to be correct. This is from 2017, and perhaps this is some fake news intended to dissuade people from looking at your research, but this says that stories claiming the DNC hack was an inside job rely heavily on a stupid conversion error no forensic expert would make. Have you seen this article, Bill?
No, I haven't. But I guess it didn't get any traction. I don't know.
Yeah, well, this is talking about a rate of 22.7 megabytes per second, but you're saying that your calculations determined that it would have been over 48 megabytes per second, more than twice this rate.
That's right, because we did the calculations on every file that was transferred.
Yeah, so I hope whoever sent me this is watching.
File. Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying?
I was saying that rate was that was the average calculation, and it didn't look at the peak, and it didn't look at all files. When we looked at all files, the highest rate was 49.1 megabytes per second.
Right. Right. And of course, it doesn't account for the even-numbered time stamps that you've found on the...
Yeah, well, that's different data, too. They're not...
Data.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So wait, which was this for?
The DNC data, not the Guccifer 2 data.
I see. So just that, in and of itself, sorting out which data is which, it's such a complicated, messy problem.
It's confusing, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It is.
How can we...
What it does is it basically nullifies and negates any argument that Mueller has.
Tell us exactly how it does that. Why does it do that?
Because it says the data was downloaded to the data they're talking about, the DNC data that was hacked, that was published by WikiLeaks.
Right.
That was downloaded to a storage device before WikiLeaks even got it.
Before WikiLeaks got it. Right.
So that says it went physically somewhere for some segment of space.
Right.
It went physically.
But the question that keeps coming back to my mind is that how do we know that it wasn't first hacked before it was got? Because certainly someone's going to copy it to a thumb drive, but how does that copying to the thumb drive show us where it came from prior to that?
See, that's the whole point. It doesn't matter. What it says is it went physically. Period. That means in a court of law they have to show that the physical transfer did not occur directly from the DNC to WikiLeaks.
I see.
That's a problem they have, and any good defense attorney will pick on that and make mincemeat of their argument.
Right. And so do you feel that this is an indicator that Seth Rich was the source of the information, or you can't determine from this?
I mean, we can't show directly that he was involved. I mean, you can think, well, that's possible. But a lot of things are possible. The question is what's true.
Right.
What we know is what we can prove with the timestamps and what we can say then about the indictment that they've issued.
Right. And it seems like there have been so many different players involved in this. At one point there was a lot of discussion from Kim.com, the internet sweetheart, German national residing in New Zealand. Have you had any communication with Kim.com? Do you have any insight into what his involvement in any of this might have been?
No, I haven't really communicated with him. I've heard some. I looked at some articles he wrote a while back, but I haven't, gotten involved with that.
Because for a while he was claiming to have some sort of bombshell information about Seth Rich. I don't understand why he would fail to bring that forward after all this time, particularly if it's going to help us understand this. And of course, when they were talking about we've got a leaker, it was John Podesta who said that leaker was Eric Braverman. I mean, again, we don't really have any kind of indicator of who would have accessed this data.
I could say it was Albert Einstein, and that doesn't prove anything either.
Right. So you're just relying strictly on empirical facts that you can derive from the
That's
data. Right. That's how you operate. That's your deal.
Opinions are like body parts. Everybody's got them.
Right. Yeah. I appreciate the editing there for on air. So where do you think this data goes next, Bill? Are you going to supply this to who? To
Well,
the special counsel's office?
Yeah. Well, sure. We published it. You know, it's out there, and we passed it to we're trying to get it to the president's lawyers. So we're passing it around, making sure that people know about it and that it gets into the right channels. It's not being advertised by the mainstream media because it doesn't fit their narrative, you know. Yeah. And because of their 2-year ongoing set of narrative that says the Russians did it, Trump is bad, he did it, you know. Yeah. That means that they've created this crow. You know, as time goes on, this crow gets bigger and bigger, and as it gets bigger and bigger, it's harder to eat. You know, if you know what I mean.
I do indeed. Perhaps maybe the Russian government will do something with this information. They've been maligned all over the place. There's economic sanctions.
Yes. I mean, I looked at it this way. When I first brought up the stuff of data about Guccifer 2, I was called a conspiracy theorist. Right. You know, I came up with that's a theory. That's a theory. I said, wait a minute. You need to understand the difference between a theorem and a theory. A theorem has proof. A theory doesn't. I have proof. The theories you spout don't.
So it's more of a conspiracy theorem.
It's a theorem, not a theory. It's got evidence to back it up.
Right. So Guccifer 2.0, remind me of your opinion of that. Is it a real person? Is it a made-up thing, or we just don't know?
I have an opinion. I don't know if it's true or not, but you know, certainly it's. I just see this as coming out of Brennan's CIA.
Guccifer 2.0.
That's my opinion, right? That's an opinion, not a fact.
Right. Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I definitely do not trust John Brennan. You know, Bill, I don't know if you and I have ever discussed QAnon, but it's another internet phenomenon that seems to rely on data and pushing out data. Do you have an opinion one way or another about QAnon?
No, I've not really been looking at them, so no, I don't. Yeah.
But as a former NSA employee who dealt with data, do you think it's plausible that someone with that high level of security would just be spewing out information for more than a year?
You mean Brennan?
Well, I mean QAnon. It's an unknown source that just is publishing information that would seem to be, you know, by this time you would think the NSA or someone could figure out who it is if they don't want that information coming out.
Yeah, I'm sure they did. I mean, do I think they do it? I think they do that all the time. They have been for years.
Who does that?
The NSA, CIA, FBI, all of them. Look, the FISA court had recognized in February of 2002 that they had been lied to by the FBI to get 75 warrants. Now, that's not the only case. They've known they've been lied to, and the rules for doing data and data processing have been violated by NSA and CIA all along. And they published little notes, been leaked about that from time to time. I've got copies of most of them that I found on the web anyway. But this is nothing new. I mean, this is the standard procedure for these agencies. That's why I refer to them as the Praetorian Guard. They control the information that goes into the president, and that in itself is pretty bad. After all, the president asked me to go talk to Director Pompeo when he was the director of CIA. And because he said, you know, he wanted them to talk, he wanted him to talk to me to get some facts about Russiagate. Now, what's that tell you? It tells you fundamentally that the president and Director Pompeo are not being told facts by their agencies.
Right.
And that's how they manipulate the thinking of the leadership of this country. Mm-hmm. When you don't tell them the truth and you manipulate data to present to them, you can direct and shape their thinking and their decision making.
Are you able to comment at all, Bill, on Mike Pompeo's departure from the CIA?
Well, I don't. See, he had asked me if I'd go talk to the FBI and the NSA after that, and I said sure I would, but I wouldn't help them violate the constitutional rights of U.S. citizens because that's what they're doing. Right. You know, those are the two main agencies involved in that. CIA is also involved, and he basically knows that too, or he knew that. So I really don't know why they moved him. I guess the president decided they wanted him over as State Department, so that's fine. I mean, that's up to the president.
Mm-hmm. And we had a conversation, of course, during the roundtable with John Kiriakou and Kevin Shipp about Gina Haspel being the new director of the CIA. Yep. Is it troubling to you at all that Donald Trump is having people like Gina Haspel, Attorney General William Barr? These all seem like neocon, deep state, George Bush people.
Well, that's true, and there's a predominance or a tendency to be more military than not, and that's not really, for the military intelligence complex, that's not really a good thing to have. But, I guess when it comes to Barr, when he became the Attorney General, one of the concerns people had about him was that he believed in mass incarceration. And I said to Joe Lauria, the editor of Consortium News, at one point, I said, well, what's wrong with that? I mean, that's exactly what we need in Washington, D.C. Because there's all these people in Congress and the agencies of the government, including the Department of Justice, who have been violating constitutional rights of every U.S. citizen all along, and many other laws of the country. Yeah. So mass incarceration is an order here.
Well, but of course, you're joking, of course, but William Barr has been involved.
I'm really serious. If I were Attorney General, I'd start this process and start issuing indictments. I would.
Right, but the fact that he hasn't done that is probably an indicator that he's more in line with his old ways. Of course, William Barr was the Attorney General under H.W. Bush, and at that time, Senate Democrats were up in arms that he refused to appoint a special counsel to investigate Herbert Walker Bush's assistance to Iraq prior to the initial invasion, which would have revealed that the United States provided Iraq with chemical weapons, including anthrax. So it seems like this guy is on the wrong side of truth and justice.
Yeah, well, that could be. I mean, I'll give him a couple months to start doing something, but after that, then he's a part of the gang.
Absolutely. Now, you've also shared with me this website, Pretty Good Knowledge. What can people expect to learn from this website?
Well, I mean, it's just that we're starting a company to start doing mass data analysis, automated massive data analysis, and in it we are planning for incorporating software that in the programming that we won't document and won't describe to anyone, but it'll sit in there and watch for evil at the top to engage. In other words, we're planning for evil at the top. This is the experience we had at NSA. When you create something that's really effective, it has a double-edged sword, right? It can be used for good or it can be used for bad. In the case of what we did, we designed it to be used for good, but the agency under Hayden, and it actually was Bush, Cheney, Hayden, and Tenet who planned this from the beginning. They decided to use it for evil, in the way I put it, simply because it violated the constitutional rights of everybody in the country by collecting everything on them. Yeah. So we're planning on building in software that will, number one, alert everybody, and two, depending on what it is, potentially shut the whole system down.
And are you surprised at all, Bill, that
fix it?
Are you surprised at all that Donald Trump was basically a victim of this mass surveillance when he was a citizen prior to becoming president, and yet he's done nothing about it?
Yeah, I know. It is kind of surprising. I mean, he basically he's not the only one, by the way. There's all the members of Congress are a part of it too. So are the judges on the Supreme Court, and also the generals on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and every federal judge in the country. They're all part of it. So they're all being watched. In other words.
Yeah.
So it's basically they're looking at people in the country who might have some power over the intelligence agencies, so they look at them to make sure they know, first of all, what they're thinking, what they're planning, so they can adjust their actions accordingly to try to divert or change the outcome of the people who are involved.
Right. And we've got Jen 2020 watching us here on Periscope. She's asking, is this because of the Patriot Act?
Well, actually, it's because of Executive Order 12333, but the Patriot Act was something overt. That's something they put out in the open for people to look at and say, see, everybody's agreeing to this, or they're past it, so this is how we're operating. But that's not what they're doing. For example, with the prison program, they say that here in the prison program, they're asking the companies to give them data on people they've got suspicion of, and they can justify it. So that's the open system that they're using. But under the upstream, they're collecting everything on the fiber lines. And for all those companies that were a part of PRISM, the ones they didn't know that what they were doing behind the scenes in secret was a program called Muscular, where they were tapping the data lines between the data centers of these companies, so that when they transferred the data to back it up every day, they collected everything those companies had. They weren't just getting the things they were asking for up front with PRISM. With the upstream and the Muscular programs, they were getting everything they had. And that was the whole point of that. That's the bulk acquisition of data. It has nothing to do with PRISM program. It has to do with these other programs, and they're all justified under Executive Order 12333. So are national security letters. Those are also justified under that. And it's under Section 23C, which says, if you're after a bad guy, that's all you have to have is the motive to get a bad guy. That means I can go on any 10 gigabit line and say there's a bad guy in there somewhere. I'm going to take in the whole line and search for him and all that. And oh, by the way, according to that executive order, I can also store that data and keep it and scan it or go through it and search it anytime I want.
Wow.
So that means that the vast bulk is U.S. citizens' communications, and they'll take it all in, put it in a storage site in Utah, a 1 million square foot storage facility, just keep it there and then retroactively analyze it anytime they want.
Right. And I mean, so this causes me to wonder why they're, supposedly still looking for these Hillary Clinton emails, because obviously the NSA has it. Why doesn't Donald Trump just say, hey, give it to me?
Well, he could do that, but, he doesn't have any control on what happens internally in the U.S. Intelligence Agency. That can get manipulated or changed or modified going through the chain of command.
It's really astounding, Bill. I mean, you're describing a system by which mysterious people who aren't elected by anyone can control the president of the United States.
Yep, that's right. And that's basically what President Eisenhower, before he was leaving office, that's what he fundamentally said. You have to be aware of this.
Right. I find it interesting that this executive order you've just told us about was passed under Ronald Reagan. I've long held the belief that Ronald Reagan was actually just an actor, a stage show for a presidency that was controlled by H.W. Bush and his neocon friends.
Well, no, it's here the wording is what they're playing up. It's so vague that they use that currently as a way of justifying what they're doing. My point is this would be easy to fix. All we'd have to do is go in and purge all the data that wasn't relevant to any task mission that they had. That would be easy to do. And once they didn't have the data, they couldn't abuse it. So all the abuse would almost immediately go away.
Yeah, I mean, so you've had this audience with Mike Pompeo, and you've communicated with President Trump. You've told them this, but nothing.
Nope. I mean, I just made it perfectly clear. I didn't pull any punches. I mean, I just said, all the agencies are lying to you.
Yeah.
So, and you don't have to believe me. You can go read any number of DOD IG reports and things like that. And, I gave them some of the report number for us. I gave them for them to go review just to see the extent of the lying. They even lied to the DOD IG inspectors.
Wow. And a lot of people are expecting Robert Mueller's report to be made public, possibly as soon as next week. I feel like we're hearing that every single week. I'm sure you don't have very much confidence in seeing any kind of honesty or evidence-based findings in Robert Mueller's report. What can you say about that?
Well, I'm going to say a few things about Robert Mueller, first of all.
Sure.
Robert Mueller, in testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee on the 30th of March of 2011, admitted to the fact that he had access to a what he called a technology file that he got together with the DOD and created. And then with this file, he can, with one query, go in and get all past emails and all future ones that they come in on a person. So what he's doing is going into the NSA database for all the collected data on every U.S. citizen and everybody else in the world that they've got, and he's pulling out all that data now. And he says he said in an interview with Bart Gellman in March or April of again 2011, where it was published in Time magazine, where he said, we've been FBI, we the FBI, have been using the Stellar Wind program since 2001. The Stellar Wind program is the domestic spying program that NSA has, and that's the data that he's going into. And if you looked at the published data from Edward Snowden for the IC Reach program, it shows not both the FBI and CIA having direct access into the NSA databases where they do the queries. And if you believe that, if you read the Reuters report on parallel construction done by the FBI and also by the Drug Enforcement Administration, where they find in the NSA data, they have the Special Operations Division of the DEA looking specifically into the NSA data, and they use that to arrest people. Then they have to do a parallel construction going around finding the same data, because the NSA data is not admissible in a court of law. So they have to go find the same data in using standard techniques, policing techniques, and when they do, they substitute that data in the court of law for the NSA data and say, this is why we arrested them. Well, that's perjury, right? And it's also fabricating evidence for a court of law. That's a felony. They've been doing this, hundreds of times every year since 2001.
Wow.
Now that's apart from Mueller. I mean, they fabricated evidence under Mueller when he was the FBI on us. They fabricated, but we caught them at it. Okay.
That was amazing.
These other poor people, they didn't catch anything because they didn't know what was going on. The judges don't even know this is happening.
Yeah, and I find there's a lot of disinformation that supports the operations, or would seem to support the operations, of Robert Mueller. I don't know if you're familiar with this website, Bill, the Lawfare blog. Have you ever seen this before?
No.
This is run by a guy named Ben Wittes, who is the self-proclaimed best friend of James Comey, and it seems to have reproduced this article from Bart Gellman about Bob Mueller. I haven't read this yet. Oh, that's nice.
Hey, buddy.
I haven't read this yet, but it's interesting, the people that are affiliated with this Lawfare blog. There's a gentleman named Matt Tate, who is an ex-GCHQ person, and you've told me that NSA and GCHQ are in fact one and the same.
They're basically the same. You can also see in IC Reach where GCHQ and the other Five Eyes countries also have direct access to the NSA database.
Right. So
and there's no oversight of any of that, by the way.
Sorry?
Anybody.
No
There's
oversight.
no oversight of any of that by anybody.
Right. So is it reasonable to presume that Bob Mueller still has access to all this data? He could sit at a computer in his house and access a database.
Not from his home, but he could do it from the FBI headquarters there. They can go to the areas where they have access to computer access, and he could do it there.
And there's no way someone from their home could devise some kind of VPN or private network tunnel to get into that?
It would be difficult simply because most of it's handled by bulk encrypted lines. So you have to know the encryption to get you to break into it and go with the flow of the encryption, and that's not going to be easy to do.
Does time division multiplexing come into any of these encryption schemes?
Well, I mean, that's not an encryption scheme, but it's those are some of the lines are time division multiplex, sure.
Time division multiplex cannot be used for encryption.
Well, it's not an encryption. It's how you mix and match information.
Got it. Well, back on Bob Mueller, because I'm very curious about him. He seems to be up to all kinds of things. I mean, the guy ran the FBI for, I think, 13 years or 12 years, second longest tenure after J. Edgar Hoover. So it's reasonable.
He did much more than J. Edgar Hoover.
Expand on that. How did he do that?
I mean, that's why we got into this parallel construction and using the data that collected on everybody. He was spying on everyone. J. Edgar Hoover could only do a few thousand people. He couldn't do everybody.
But it seems like Robert Mueller is carrying the torch of an FBI that's not so much protecting the people of the United States, but surveilling and basically controlling politicians or anyone that might seek to reveal things that they don't want revealed.
That's correct. And he'd be one of the first people I referred to a grand jury.
Wow. I hope that that can happen, Bill. Jennifer's watching us on Periscope. She's asking, how did Hillary send SAP special access protocol information from her home server?
She had it. She had it downloaded by what's her name? Her secretary or assistant.
Huma Abedin.
Yeah, and passed. She removed the classification lines and passed it across open network from somewhere in the State Department to her at home.
So maybe
and that basically compromised some of the gamma material. That's why originally I thought NSA was kind of a prime candidate for coming after them, because that gamma material is the highest classified data at NSA. It's really the most sensitive. What it says is this is the result of the solution to an encryption system. So, but and those are sometimes used quite widely in the world, and so therefore that gave the understanding that they had broken that particular crypt system, and it was a basic extract directly from a gamma report, and that meant you knew exactly where the encryption was, and you could go find out what they were using, and therefore know that it was compromised around the world. That was why it was such a bad thing to have happen. That's why that was that's a very serious compromise.
Are you shocked that so many people feel like it's no big deal? She was just using personal email for convenience?
Well, I mean, the knowledge of that coming out with WikiLeaks and so on basically showed that they were reading that. So now every country using that encryption knows we're reading it. It's like compromising the Enigma, reading the Enigma in World War II, or I mean, not when you're in a conflict, but before you get to the conflict. You're compromising that we are reading something like an Enigma. So that can make it. They can feed you false information. This is how you can be manipulated. They can feed you false information under that encryption, and you can make bad decisions based on that. And as that was going along, that could lead you into the war, making bad decisions to get there, and then make bad decisions in the war itself.
So, do I understand you correctly that Hillary Clinton basically enabled a massive exploit for man-in-the-middle attacks?
No, you can't do that with the encryption because you don't know the keys, the setup keys, the initial load. So you'd have to do that to be able to do what you're suggesting. The point is, it compromised the fact that they know that NSA knows how to break that system.
NSA knows how to break the most secure encryption system. So they're basically in charge of everything.
That's right.
But if they can break the encryption, can't the NSA do a man-in-the-middle attack? Intercept the transmission, break the encryption, put something in there and send it along?
Oh, I mean, they could capture that data. They do all the time anyway, yeah.
So that
then they simply recover the keys and read it.
Bill, if you need to go spend time with your family, don't let me hold you. I really appreciate your time.
It's my grandson. He's just having fun here.
So, sorry, not to harp on this man-in-the-middle thing, but I want to make sure I understand it, and it is very complicated. So the NSA can break this encryption. Someone sends an encrypted message, NSA intercepts it, decrypts it, says, oh, we don't want this person getting this message. They change it and then send it along, and the receiver is none the wiser, right?
They could do that, yes.
I see. Okay, interesting. Well, changing gears for a moment, Bill, you've got a new movie coming out, isn't that right?
Well, you mean no? You mean A Good American?
Been out for a while.
It's been out for a while, so yeah. But it's still a good movie. I mean, it gives you some idea, basically, of. And we tried to. The director Fritz Moser was an Austrian director, and he kind of tried to put it in a sense with the language and so on that would be understandable by virtually everyone. And so that was the whole idea. We tried to get across this. When you talked about NSA being the man in the middle, this gets at how it really became the man in the middle.
Interesting. And what's the best way for people to watch that? Is that on Netflix or?
It's on Netflix. You can also Google it and get it on the net. You can do. I think one is free. You pay $2 for or something like that. So.
There you go. And it looks like if people just go to agoodomerican.org, that's the main website for the film, Frederick Moser, and you can watch the film right there on the website. And Bill, last time we spoke, you were telling us about the ongoing legal case that you've got. Any new developments with that?
Well, you see, yes, there are. There's a motion made by the government to say, we're not collecting everything. We're not doing bulk collection because the prison program doesn't do that. That's data we asked for them. See, they wanted to point the court to deceive the court into thinking that's the program we're talking about, when it's not. It's the upstream programs and the muscular program, that kind of programs are the ones we're talking about, where the bulk collection occurs. This prison program is basically something they created as an upfront thing that they can point to say, see, we, the intelligence agency of the United States, are in fact complying with the law, and we're going through using this program to do it, where we ask for specific information with understanding we have a warrant, stuff like that. Well, that's not the real program. That's not the bulk acquisition program. But the government's trying to make the courts think that that's what the program is that we're talking about.
Wow.
So they're trying to deceive and manipulate the court.
It's amazing how many people are actively trying to do that. It's a real threat to justice in this country when people are engaged in those kind of things. And of course, the Wikipedia entry for the muscular surveillance program says right here that it's located in the United Kingdom. It's jointly operated by GCHQ and the NSA, which just, further underscores what you've told us about those two organizations.
Yeah, but it's not just in the UK, okay? all the fibers in the world are tapped in one form or another, at one point or another. Where they try to do the tapping is where multiple fibers converge, because that's where at that point, if you're tapping there, you can see all the fibers at once. Otherwise, you have to tap each fiber individually. So go where they converge and you see them all. And that's basically where they're tapping in the world.
Wow. And this surveillance, it's really the lifeblood of this worldwide control grid, isn't it? Because
yes,
anyone who attempts to expose it or disrupt it or do anything like that gets smacked down pretty hard.
Yeah, well, they'll send the FBI or the Department of Justice at you just to shut you up. Yeah, and they'll even put you in jail.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we see that happening. Even the specter of having communicated with Julian Assange has got 27 FBI agents kicking in the door of Roger Stone. We heard a pretty not credible Michael Cohen testify that he overheard Roger Stone speaking with Donald Trump about having communicated with WikiLeaks. I mean, this is so much nonsense, Bill. It's WikiLeaks are journalists.
I mean, again, not counting that fact, just the fact that they're saying he communicated with WikiLeaks. Well, NSA should know that. I mean, they should have packets and so on. They're seeing the transfer and so on. So, or the phone calls, whatever. And so or short messages, whichever. It doesn't matter. Any communications, even chatting on the internet would be a way of getting it. They can certainly see that too. So, I mean, NSA should have that data, and they should have already told everybody, including the Mueller and everyone else, that was true. And it wouldn't be a question of saying somebody overheard something maybe that was happening, second, third hand and stuff like that. There's no question that they should be able to prove that one way or the other.
So all this stuff we're seeing, it really is literally just theater, because the NSA has the definitive information. Is there ever any legitimate circumstance under which this NSA data will be used or shown to the president, the FBI, or anyone? It seems like they have all this data, but they never show it.
Well, you see, that's how you manipulate the president and anybody in Congress that has power above you. The committees, all of that. That's how you manipulate them.
Wow, it's really stunning set of facts there, Bill. It's hard to imagine what we can do. Well,
just look at one of the stuff coming out recently. You have a soft coup with the FBI and the DOJ trying to get rid of President Trump. Yeah. I mean, that's a soft coup. So you're trying a coup here. Well, they're doing a coup. What do you think? Do you think giving him disinformation or limited information would be a problem? No.
Right. It's scary for people to think about. And then the news, of course, is manipulated to sway public opinion to prevent people from doing anything. Everybody's upset about which side of the cow fart argument they're on with Ocasio-Cortez.
Well, let's put it this way. It's, for example, I think it was back in when President was Reagan, and the former chief of CIA at that time said, Well, we are infiltrating the media, and you'll know that when 70% or more of the data information in the public is false, that we've succeeded.
Right. That was William Casey, I believe.
That was Casey, yeah.
Now, that's interesting because Kevin Shipp has spoken very highly of William Casey, said he was a good man.
Yeah, I guess he did good in manipulating the news, yeah.
We'll have to ask Kevin about that. We're getting close to the end of our time here, Bill, and I really appreciate you taking time away from your family on a Friday. Was there anything else you wanted to share with the audience before we wrap it up for today?
Well, no, I think we pretty much, I mean, I would also add that I guess with the fact that Mueller never called to ask for the facts that we knew, nor did any of the other committees investigating, the House, Senate, Intelligence, or Judiciary. None of those people had called.
What's your impression of Adam Schiff? Will he make a good head of the House Intelligence Committee?
No.
Why do you say that?
Just because he's been one of the main ones spewing all this crap.
Yeah.
You know, he has no facts to back up anything he said. I mean, he needs to have credibility, so produce some facts. If you're going to say something, have something to back it up, not just your opinion.
I think in addition to a post-constitutional America, we're now living in a fact-free America where it's just a matter of who can shout the loudest and the longest.
And keep going. Yeah, that's right. And for example, Tom Drake, when he was in Europe, in Germany once, an old elderly German couple came up to him and said, you know, I keep saying this because it really makes the point. You know, we are in a post-fascist state and we know it, and you're in a pre-fascist state and you don't know it. Wow. That's really the underlying point here, that we're all going toward a totalitarian state, and these are some of the techniques that totalitarian states use.
It almost, by some measures, seems too late, Bill. Do you see any hope for us to bring it back from the brink here?
No, I mean, I was hoping that President Trump was, you know, he's probably the one that would at least have a chance of doing it, because he's not a political animal. I mean, he's not been with any party. He's not, he doesn't owe anybody anything, and he has his own money. He doesn't worry about making money. So, you know, he's kind of a free radical. That's why everybody started out attacking him from the very beginning.
Right.
Because, you know, he didn't owe them anything. And so he could be a free cannon, you know, on deck, you know, so to speak, rolling around, shooting in any direction, so to speak. And they were afraid of that. But if he ordered somebody who would go in there to, first of all, into NSA, because they're the major repository, also CIA, because they have a good chunk too, and just say, I want you to purge any data that's not relevant to the mission they're assigned. In other words, purge all the stellar wind data of any U.S. citizen that is not involved in any targeted activity that you know and has a warrant consistent with the Fourth Amendment on them. If you don't have that, you purge their data. And that would be easy to do. And so at that point, all this misuse and abuse of data, of information of U.S. citizens, and you could extend it to everybody in the world, that wouldn't be a problem either. I mean, there are ways to do that, and, you know, certainly we know how to do that, but nobody else does.
Have you lost confidence that President Trump might do this?
Not yet.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. So on that positive note, Bill, I'm going to thank you for joining me again today. Wish you a very pleasant weekend. I want to thank our viewers for watching, and I want to remind everyone that Crowdsource the Truth is a viewer-sponsored program, and if you're watching and enjoying the show, please go to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. You're going to enjoy a lot of exclusive content there, and you're going to keep the show going. I want to thank my guest, Bill Binney. Bill, thanks for everything that you're doing, and certainly you have an open invitation anytime you want to come back on the show.
Okay, thanks.
Good to see you as always. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.